Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt and welcome to New Brick Workshop. Now there are times when you make things like perhaps tray, where you've got mitred joints, where you want the added security of a spline across the joint. And the spline is a piece of wood that gets glued in and it makes the joint stronger. And I've got an example of where I've just used one, and there's a spline at each of the corners of this little tray that I made. And in order to do that, you need to make a spline sled for your table saw, and then make some little splines to go inside, glue them in, and that's it, all done. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to go about it. I've made a start, and this is the part that goes against the fence of the saw, and this is the part which will go along through, and the blade will go through here somewhere. And we've got to have the V part, so I've done a very simple bit of mitre work here, and this will fit on something like that. In order to make this nice and stable, there'll be pieces that fit, one from this side, one from that side, and those pieces will strengthen this part in the middle and also act as a sort of finger guard, because the blade will always be underneath those pieces. You'll see in a second. So these pieces will go in so they're nice and square to this edge here, and also parallel here. So one will go in like that with the glue, the same with this side, and the idea is that the piece here is supported. This is where your workpiece will go in for the spline cut, and this thickness of this is such that the hands shouldn't be exposed to the saw blade. And you have to make absolutely certain that there's no trace of any glue residues down in these various mating surfaces. I say mating surfaces, this is where the box that you're making that needs the spline joint will be fitting, and it needs to be absolutely clear. And the same goes for this particular area here, because this has got to fit in there absolutely perfectly, and you can see that is exactly what is happening now. I notice that in this construction I'm using just glue, no nails, screws or any other metal fixings, because it has to be absolutely safe when a saw blade or a router cutter passes through here. Right, so I'm going to put some glue on these surfaces here and onto this back surface here. You may have seen me do this before, but if you've got a large surface like this for glue, then use something like an old credit card or membership card to spread the glue evenly, and it works a treat. So that's going to go down in there. Got to make sure it makes a really nice fit, that's really good. I want to apply some pressure here, so I'm going to take a little rectangular block of wood, put it there, and you may have seen these before as well. I've made these for clamping up things across a corner, and they're made simply by just drilling a hole in the centre of a piece of wood and then doing a little V cut here, and that's a perfect right angle between those two faces. And I'm going to use one of those on top like so, and I'm going to re-employ my big clamp for this. I've just moved this over a bit. That's only just slightly nipped up there for the time being, because I also want to clamp across this way. Maybe actually easier if I do it this way, like so. One there, and one on this other side. And now with those two operating, I can then push down on this one a little bit more. Spot on. Now I've got these little offcuts when I cut these pieces. I'm just going to use these to strengthen up this end here. I'll just put this glue on, and in that goes. And the reason for this is quite simple. At this end we've got the glue line between this vertical piece and these V pieces here, but at this end there's no additional support. So I'm just going to put these little glue blocks in, and I think these will make a really good job. Well, that's it. I've put those extra little bits under there, I've pushed them as best I can, and I'm just going to leave this to dry. Now, in order to set this up now for use, I'm going to always have my fence at 100, and I've written that here on the device itself. And I've measured this distance from the bottom of this V to the floor there, and that's 30 millimeters. And I know for my trays, for example, I need another 10, so I'll need the saw set at 40. But initially what I'm going to do is run it through at 20, then 30, then 40, and then 42. And that then should provide everything set up for future cuts. Now you really need to be careful when using your saw without the full guard, as you have to do with this type of sled, as it can be a little tricky. So there we go. And now I've got this little cut line here. I can now put some calibrating lines coming up here, probably at 10 millimeter intervals, I think would be all that's needed, so that I can then, when I'm placing something on here, have some reference point so I know where to put it. I've marked at either side of the kerf line. I'm just going to carry these marks along now. This isn't super accurate rocket science, it's just intended to be a guide. So those little marks done, and now I can continue these like so. Now you have those lines all the way along there. Now using this is very simple now. All you do is you place whatever object is you want in here, and then start the saw and whiz it through, and that then produces a kerf line cut into which you can put a little slither of wood. Now the slithers of wood must have their grain running like so, because otherwise if you have the grain running that way it will break here, or if you have the grain running that way it will break there. So you've got to have the grain running 45 degrees, and that's easy to do. Now in order to demonstrate this, I've got this little tray I made. It actually doesn't need any strengthening, but I'll use it just to demonstrate the principle. Now the first thing to do is to measure the length of the mitre joint here, and this one is 9 millimeters. So therefore I want a spline which is probably about 7 millimeters in width. So remember, the height to here is 30, so I'm going to set the saw height to 37. I'm now going to position this where I want the spline. I'm only going to have one near the top, so that's positioned on there. Everything's set up, and away I go. Now, even though we've calculated the height that it's going to do the cut, never put your fingers into the danger area, which is in the centre there. Always have your fingers out of the way. So there are those 4 spline holes, what we should call them, and here's my little piece of wood which I'm going to use to go in there. Now the next stage is to cut 4 of these to fit in there. It's easy to do. I've got the saw set up at 45 degrees, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to produce some pieces. If I produce the first one, right, there's the first one, and the grain runs across that way. This will fit into there, obviously with some glue, and the grain will be running that way, and that will be glued in. So there are my 4 pieces, and I'll just glue these in. Right, so I'm just going to put a tiny bit of glue in these slots here, and try as I might, I have put too much in there, and now I'm just going to get these in. You've got to watch when you're putting these in not to then rest this on a piece that's protruding. So you've got to be very careful about that. And this one is going in here. And I use the hammer just to tap it very, very gently. And now these bits can be trimmed off in a number of different ways. And I like to use this little saw. It's a little Japanese pool saw. Came from Screwfix, very cheap and cheerful. The trick with these pool saws is to make sure you keep a bit of pressure on here, but without getting your fingers in the way of the actual cutting edge. And that way, because there's no set on these saws, in other words, the little teeth are in the same plane as the blade itself. There's no set there. There's no scratching of the wood at all. And finally, a quick blast with the sander. And there are those 4 splines in there. And the beauty is that that will help to strengthen the joint. And it's normally at the top on something like this where the damage would start to be caused, because one's holding it like this, and it's putting more strain at the top end of the joint rather than the bottom. Of course, the bottom end of the joint is well supported because it's got this bottom to the tray or whatever it is. But you can see how neat those are, and having a contrast in wood is a good idea because it then sets it out as being something deliberate, and it's part of the design. So there we go. There's the finished product. It's absolutely super duper. This is as strong as anything now. It wasn't too bad before, but anyway, it's stronger. And thanks to this little spline sled which I've made, we can now strengthen these mitre joints. And I think they look quite neat. Many thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.